Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Tech Talk Education. This is movie 6 in our exploration of Metasploitable 2. And today we're going to talk about HTTP, and we're going to show you how to look for HTTP headers. I'm going to give you a brief historical overview of HTTP so you have a feel for what's involved there as well. And so let's get started. It should be very informative and a lot of fun. So the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP, is a pretty big topic, and there's a lot to know about it. I'm just going to briefly touch over it. I've got a little PowerPoint slide deck that I whipped up here, and I just want to go over a few things with you. I'm hoping to entice you to learn more about HTTP because, as you probably recognize in the area of cybersecurity, people are trying to hack into websites all the time, and so understanding the background of what HTTP does and what it's about is going to be really helpful to you. So we're going to explore HTTP a little bit here. Let me get my next slide here. Now, we're going to start out. There are several versions of HTTP. It was invented by this fellow here. His name is Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He is a British dude. And he would develop this in 1989. There are other versions. So when it went public and when it actually got out there, it was known as version 0.9. This was in 1991. And it was just called HTTP at that time. And the idea was just to be able to transfer files, data across the internet. And then in 1996, HTTP 1.0 was brought out, and it included the concept of status codes, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. It also provided a thing called a header, and what a header provides is data about the data. And so it's possible for you to look at an HTTP header and find out what kind of function you're doing, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. Now, HTTP 1.1 was the big guy. It was introduced in 1997 and updated again in 1999. And it included a lot of different changes that were very, very good. But one of the things that it talked about was chunked transfers. And we need to talk about what chunking is, also caching of data and authentication methods. Finally, HTTP 2 came around in 2015. This is the one that's being slowly but surely adopted. This is in the mainstream right now. And it's focused on performance, and it can handle things like stream multiplexing, header compression, server pushing, things like that. And now the big guy that's out there is HTTP 3, and it's starting to take off. It's in progress, and it introduces a new protocol called QUIC that you need to be aware of. Now, one of the things that I will point out is that when you're using HTTP, it is a connect in session. If you think of it as like a phone call to your mom or your dad, phone call to your son or your daughter, you're on the phone, you have a guaranteed connection with them and only with them. That's essentially the idea behind TCP. Well, HTTP 3 does not use TTP, it uses what's called UDP, and the idea behind UDP is we throw the packets out on the wire and then we expect them to get where they go, and there's not really necessarily an order to it. I'm way oversimplifying this, but the main idea I want you to hang on to is that HTTP 3 is using QUIC, which uses UDP as opposed to TCP. Now, we got to talk about chunking. So this is a really interesting concept, and you will run into this as you're going through your cybersecurity studies. It happened in HTTP 1.1 right here. And what we do is we take and we chunk the data into sizes that are manageable by the server or by the client. Now, one of the things that you need to know about a chunk is that it has a section number, like you can see here, 0, and then it has a couple of escape sequences, and you need to know about these. So \R stands for carriage return. It's like the old typewriter. I don't even know if you remember seeing a typewriter, but you'd type along and then you'd hit this lever and the carriage would go back and you could start typing again. And it's called a carriage return. Well, that has been adapted into the lexicon of computing. And so \R is what is called an escape sequence, and it represents a carriage return. But you also notice here that you have a \N as well. \N stands for new line. So what we are saying here is that when we are chunking and we're doing HTTP chunking, we expect to see a section number, and then we expect to see not one but two carriage return and new line escape sequences. So in this thing here, you can see that there's a 0th section, a carriage return and a new line, carriage return and new line. And so let's go see what that looks like, because that's very, very different. So I'm going to move to the next slide here. Here's an example of what it looks like. Now suppose that we took the word Wikipedia, this title here, and we said that we want to chunk that. What we would do is we would start out by saying that there is one chunk that's going to be of level 4. So it's going to have 4 characters in it, and we give it a carriage return new line, and then we type in the word wiki, carriage return new line. Then we tell it we have another section of length 5, carriage return new line, pedia, carriage return new line, and then we have e, carriage return new line, and you get the idea here. And then we end the entire thing with a 0, carriage return new line, carriage return new line. We're done. And so you're just, what I'm really pointing out here is not so much that it's weird looking at Wikipedia like that, but the fact that you're going to have to get used to the character, the number of characters involved in a certain chunk, and you'll have to know about these carriage return and new line escape sequences. So that's what I'm trying to allude to here. HTTP has several what are called methods. HTTP is a client-server model, which means that we are always talking to a server. Like when you go out to a website, you're talking to a web server. The majority of web servers are running a very, very good piece of web serving software called Apache, although another big player in the industry is Microsoft's Internet Information Server. It's called IIS. And so when you're connecting to a website, you're connecting to some server software that's running out there, and then you're setting up these requests. So you request something from the web server, it responds back to you, you respond back to it, and so forth. Maybe there's a request coming from the server that's requesting information from you. And so there are several methods that you need to know about. There's a get method, which means get some data, a post method, which means put some data, a put method, which means put some data, and delete something, so we can delete data. And there are status codes. There are an absolute ton of status codes. I'm sure you're familiar with some of them, but probably not all of them. Let's look at them. So let's talk about the status codes 1 through 100. There's 1 through 199, 200 through 299, 300 through 399, 400 through 499, and 500 through 599. So there's a ton of them, and not all of them are necessarily important. So you're looking at these, and number 100 is continue, and you've got switching protocols, and then you've got this thing called WebDAV, which we'll describe here in just a minute, and a thing called early hints. Now, when you're out using cybersecurity tools, you might get a status code back from the web server, and you probably need to know what those status codes are, but also, you probably want to be sure that you know how to look those up and find out what they mean in case you get a weird one. WebDAV stands for Web Distributed Authoring and Versioning, and it's a very simple idea. The idea is, hey, we want to let everybody work on a document, and so we give you permission to work on the document, and you can access it, and you can write on the document and edit files and do things like that on a web server. It's called WebDAV. I do not know how popular it is anymore. I'm sure it's still in use, and I know that I've used it before, so it's just something to be aware of. Okay, well now let's go look at the sections 200 through 299. Now there is one that you'll see quite often. It's response code 200, and it means, okay, everything's cool, we're working just fine here. But there are some others, and you can see these as you look down through the sections of these response codes. These are section response codes 200. These imply success of some kind. There's another one that implies a redirection, meaning the server is sending us somewhere else. And so you can see like 301 is moved permanently. 302 is weird. I found it, but I'm going to give you another URL to go to look for it. And there's one called use a proxy. What is a proxy? Well, a proxy is a machine that stands in the way of you getting out to the web. And back in the day, I remember working with an old version of Microsoft Proxy Server. It was very old, But now they've gotten very, very sophisticated. And so generally speaking, when you go out to the web, you are not going out as the proxy is going out on behalf of you. It's a very, very common thing. Now, this use proxy has been deprecated. So what that means is that we're doing it a little bit different way, but the idea of a proxy is still out there. And then we've got this idea of a URI. I'll put up the definition for you in the movie of what a URI is. Now, this is the big guy. This is the client error code. So we're getting an error back. And I'm sure that you're familiar with some of these. The big guy is 404 error, not found. I can't find that. But there's tons of others. And I would love for you to look down at the bottom of the page at error 418. I'm a teapot. I have no idea why that's in there, but it is in there. And it was an April Fool's joke. So if you get an error code 418, somebody's playing a joke on you, I guess. Here's another list of error code 400s. There's a lot of them. I love this one, number 451, unavailable for legal reasons. It's denying your access because of some legal reason. And then finally, we have error code server error responses. These are the server's giving an error back to you, like 505 HTTP version not supported, gateway timeout. I've seen that before. Service unavailable, bad gateway, things like that. So these are error codes. And the idea here is that as you're using tools to look at a website, you're checking it for vulnerabilities, for example, vulnerability analysis, things like that. You might get some status codes back from the server, and you probably should know what they are and at least where to go to look at them. Now, there are some technical components that you should be aware of with HTTP. First of all, it is a stateless protocol. What does that mean? It means each request from a client is sent to a server, and all of those requests are independent. It is stateless. We're not relying on the state of a previous packet going to the server. We're relying on the state of the current request. We've talked about headers. There are 4 headers, and they provide information about the request or response. Now, these headers are looked at extensively when, somebody like a Google or a Yahoo or, Amazon or whoever crawls you, Apple, and they crawl your site and they get all of these different elements, HTML elements, and they're looking at these different things. And that's something that's useful in terms of companies crawling your site, finding out who you are, what you're about. And then we have secure HTTP. It's called HTTPS. HTTP typically listens on port 80. HTTPS typically listens on port 443. And the difference between the two is that HTTPS signal messages are encrypted, whereas HTTP is not. And you're really not going to see a lot of HTTP traffic anymore these days, as it is so loose that it's very hackable. Generally speaking, I would say the vast majority of the world's websites and web traffic has been converted to HTTPS. Now, let's talk about the impact. So without HTTP and Tim Berners-Lee, you would not have the web. So it's as simple as that. HTTP is a very, very big thing. And as it has evolved, different programming formats have been invented to be able to make our web development much more robust, much more technical, much more capable, maybe easier to use. And so you should know that there's a thing called an application programmer interface. It's called an API. And the idea is that we're going to give you some methods by which you can connect to a web server, and you will use these methods. So we will give you these methods that you can use to get your job done on a web server. Well, the big guy now is called REST. It stands for Representational State Transfer, and the API is called a RESTful API. And this, I don't have enough time to even do a video or 10 videos on that. It's a very big subject, and you'll need to take a class on it, but you should be aware that when you see this idea of a RESTful API, it is a newer thing. It's been in use a long time now, but the idea is that we're coming up with much more creative, smart, intelligent, feature-rich ways for you to go out to a website and do things on the website. And I'm sure that you have noticed, if you've been working with the web at all, that websites change and they grow and they become very, very different and much more powerful. It's actually really amazing what these web developers can do with APIs today. Now, there are some trends. We talked about HTTP2. It is becoming increasingly adopted, but the big guy, and something you really should probably study up on, is QUIC. It stands for Quick UDP Internet Connections, and it's really growing rapidly in the field of web development. And the main idea with QUIC is that if it's not going to use TCP, it's going to use UDP instead. So that's the end of this slideshow. Now what I want to do is I want to jump into Kali Linux and Metasploitable and show you how you can look at some of these headers and see what they look like. So let's get started with that now, because that'll be a lot of fun. All right, so I've got Kali Linux, and you know the drill here. We've got pfSense open, Metasploitable, and Kali Linux now. We're all running in Oracle VirtualBox VM. And the first thing I've done is I have opened Firefox. I'm going to open a command prompt as well. And I want you to recall that what you do is you type in sudo netdiscover to find out what other computers are on the network. This is in case you come back, you can't remember the IP address for your Metasploitable box. You can come in here and look for it. And mine is 1.101. So I'm just going to Control-C that, clear the screen for now, and minimize this temporarily. Now, here's the thing. If we come in here and we go to 192.168.1.101, which is my Metasploitable box, your address is probably going to be different. We get a response from Metasploitable, and these are all different websites that we can mess around with. And there are quite a few of them. I want to do a movie, I'll do a little bit of a movie on Mutillidae, and then we want to do something with darn vulnerable web app. We've already talked about WebDAV. I'll show you how to use that here in a minute. And then I'll do some other stuff with Tweaky and phpMyAdmin. Now, phpMyAdmin is a utility that is used to go work with MySQL databases. So that is something a little bit different that we'll have to look at. Okay, so right now, if we were just click Mutillidae, for example, it would take us over to the Mutillidae section of Metasploitable. And then here's darn vulnerable web app, and so forth. So that's the idea. What's happening is Metasploitable is running a web server. There are several different links on here that are taking us to a specific place, and now we can begin to hack that place. So here's something that's interesting that you remember we talked about WebDAV, and I want to show that to you. So what I'm going to do is right-click the tab here in Brave, in Firefox. I use Brave normally day to day. That's why I said that. And I'm going to duplicate the tab right here. And now I'm going to jump over to this tab and put in a slash and then type in DAV. And that's going to take me to the WebDAV folder. So it is telling you that it's running Apache 2.2.8. It's on Ubuntu server. And it's running DAV version 2. So we know that. Now let's see if we can exploit DAV. Now in Kali, what I've done is I've switched to my documents folder, and I want you to know about a command called cadaver. And of course, DAV, WebDAV, is in the middle of this, so I don't know what they meant by this term, but cadaver, of course, is a dead human being. But in this case, the Kali command is called cadaver. And we're going to go out to HTTP. Now, this is not HTTPS. This is port 80, so this is very, very hackable. And we're going to run out to, in my case, this is my Metasploitable 2 box, and then I'm going to go into the DAV folder. So let's see if this works. Let's do a little bit of searching to see if we can use DAV, if we can hack into DAV. I'm going to use a tool called Nikto to do this. I'm going to put in attack H and then tell it where to go. So I'm going to tell it to go out to my Metasploitable box. And I'm going to put in DAV. You need to be careful to put a trailing slash in there as well to help it terminate that statement. And we hit enter. Now what it does is it goes through and it looks at the Metasploitable box. What Nikto is specifically doing is it's looking for HTTP problems that we could potentially exploit. And so as we're looking up through here, I'll just scroll up through here and see what I can see. You start at the top, And then you can see where it's headed. It's on port 80, which is very loose, port 80 HTTP. And we scroll down through here and we look at some things. And one of the things that we note is that the HTTP method put allows clients to save files on the web server. So that is something that we want to exploit. Well, okay, now this is our opportunity to use a new tool that I want to introduce you to, and it's called msfvenom, Metasploit Framework Venom. Now what Venom does is it allows you to create a backdoor or create some sort of payload that you can introduce onto another computer, so we can use msfvenom to do this work. So you begin, I'm just going to do this, I'm going to change to sudo su, so I'm root and I don't have to worry about it, clear the screen. And here's the command. I'll explain it to you in just a minute, but what we want to do is we know that WebDAV and all of the other servers that are running on Metasploitable know about a language called PHP. If you're going to develop code for a server that uses database and keeps track of users and payments and things like that, you're probably going to write quite a bit of PHP code. I don't think it's the best looking code in the world, but it is what you have to use if you want to communicate with what's called a content management system, a CMS as it were. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a PHP backdoor. And so look at this. Now let's cut this apart here. So msfvenom, Metasploit Framework Venom, is a tool that creates payloads for you. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to create a payload that will work for us to be able to access WebDAV on the Metasploitable computer. Next thing we do is we tell it that we're going to use PHP for our protocol, and we're going to get it out of Meterpreter, reverse TCP. Now you have to pay attention to this. The L host here is the local host. This is not your Metasploitable box, it is your Kali machine. So I keyed that in wrong. And then the local port that we're using is going to be 4444, which is going to give us a reverse shell. And we're going to go in raw format. So we'll hit enter, and msvenom will do its work. Now, believe it or not, this is your backdoor. So here's what it returned back to you. And what you're looking for, I've got the font set a little large so you can see it on the screen here. What you're looking for is all of this. So we're starting out right here and we're saying this is PHP code right here. And we're just going to go down and get all of that PHP code and scroll down through there just like that. And we're going to copy that. So I've got that now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my little mini text editor here, Mousepad. Now you can go along here and you can read this a little bit easier. And you can see what's happening here. So we've got some comments here. And then we could go through here and we could fix this and see if it will. We could fix it and make it look a little better. But this is what PHP looks like. I'm going to save this off, and I'm going to save it as a file that has a PHP extension on it. So I'm going to say File, Save As. I'm going to put it in Documents, and I'm going to call this file simple backdoor.php, like so. It's got to have the PHP extension on it so that it works. And I'll put this away, and I'll clear the screen here. Next, what we do is we connect to the WebDAV area on Metasploitable 2 by using cadaver. So we type in cadaver, like so. This is embedded into Kali Linux, and it's a command that goes and puts stuff up onto a WebDAV server. It might be why you understand that WebDAV is not the world's most secure type of thing, and we love to see WebDAV open when we see it. And we're going to tell it to put it out at http://192.168.1.101. This is your Metasploitable box /DAV. And then I put a slash in front of that and hit enter. And I get a DAV prompt. So what it's telling you here is that I'm issuing DAV commands, and I'm inside the DAV folder here. So now I'm going to use a command that's very, very similar to FTP. FTP has commands called put and get. We're doing the same thing here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our file called simple backdoor.php up onto DAV. So let's see if that works. There we go, it's up there. Now how can you tell it's there? Well, if I go back to my browser and I do a refresh on here, now I can see that simple backdoor PHP is up there. So that's pretty cool. All right, now the next thing to do is to grab another terminal window. You really don't have to. We could do it here. We could close Cadaver now because we've put that file up there. So I could do a Control-C to close it and clear the screen. Now what we want to do is start MSF console. And the concept here with msfvenom is that we've created a backdoor. We've used Meterpreter commands to create a backdoor for us, and then we uploaded it to the computer that we want to use. We're trying to get what's called a reverse shell. So what that means is that when you go out, normally you connect to another computer and you're running commands on the computer. That is called a shell. Even when I'm using the terminal window here, this is called a shell. I'm shelled out to this particular computer and I'm executing commands on the computer. Now if I shell out to a computer, like I put a file on WebDAV and then I launch that executable, the executable will come back to me, and that is a reverse shell, which means that it's doing the instructions I told it to do, and then it's reporting back to me so I can see it on my screen, and this is called a reverse shell. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use exploit/multi/handler. This is a big guy. There's a lot. This is used quite a bit. Notice here that it loads up a default payload generic shell reverse TCP, and we're going to set it to a different payload. So we're going to set payload to, I better spell payload right, PHP, because we have a PHP script out there that we want to use. Now this is the same thing you saw when we were generating this using msfvenom. We told it go out and create a PHP file using Meterpreter, and we were going to get a reverse TCP shell on here. So we hit enter, and that's our payload. Now we type in options, and the options, you can see the payload here. It shows you right up here what the payload is right there. And then if we're looking at this, we see that we have a local host option that is required. So what we have to do is set lhost to us. So I'm going to set it to 192.168.1.105, which is the Kali box. And then you'll notice here that L port is currently set to 4444. This is very common. If you're out there looking at, YouTube influencers that are talking about cybersecurity, very often they're going to go with port 4444, some sort of a default port. Sometimes you'll see them adjusted to port 5555 or something else. But in this case, we don't have to adjust the localhost port because that's the same port that we told our backdoor to use, so we're in good shape here. So we can just type in exploit. Now the next thing that you have to do after you've gotten this running, because we have a listener going here, what's happening is the system is listening for any kind of calls back to us, our Kali box, on port 4444. Now what we do is we go tell it to launch this PHP file, boom, and I just click that, and there we go, look at that. And now what we have is a reverse shell into our DAV, and we can type in help for any commands that we can use on Meterpreter. I've shown you this before, and we can come up and look and see what we've got. Now we can issue commands that way because now our backdoor shell has worked, and we have a Meterpreter shell that's open, and we can actually use a command right here called shell to get into the native Ubuntu system. So if I type in shell, it's going to switch me to the native Ubuntu system, and I can type in things like ID, and it tells me, well, I am ID 33 World Wide Web Data, get ID groups, and so forth. And I can type in who am I, like this. I'm WW Data, and I could even tell it to cat certain items out. Now, if you want to get out of this shell, what you do is you type in exit, and it will exit this shell back to the Meterpreter screen. And then if you want to get out of Meterpreter, what you do is you type in exit again, or what you could do is you could say background this session like this and hit enter, and then clear the screen. If you want to see what sessions you have open, you can type in sessions and hit enter, and it'll show you that you currently have this sitting here. So what did we do? Well, we found out that DAV was running, WebDAV, and then what we did was we went and we used msfvenom to create a little app for us that we could use as a backdoor. We logged into DAV, and we uploaded that to the DAV folder right here. Then we started Metsploitable, or Metasploit, and we told it that we were going to use an auxiliary. Let's see if I can find that right here. I guess I don't have it right now. And we set the payload to PHP Meterpreter reverse PCP. Well, what that did then was that means that it's expecting to run some PHP, and when the PHP runs, it's going to take us into a Meterpreter session. So all we had to do is click this, and boom, we're away to the races, and we are ready to start doing some WebDAV work. Now, we went through that slideshow, and I was talking to you about the different methods that HTTP uses. In this case, what has happened is you have used the HTTP put method to put something onto a server, and in this case, that something was malicious. Now, this movie's gone pretty long because of the PowerPoint slide, so I think what I'm going to do is terminate it today. We'll come back in, we'll do another movie, and we'll handle some other ways in which we could get at the various websites that Metasploitable 2 is hosting. Hope you enjoyed this. Have a good day, and I'll talk to you next time.